Welcome to Fundamentals of Cybersecurity, CSCI150N. This is Chapter 23, Computer Forensics. I'm your instructor, Peter Keurig, and in this chapter you will learn how to explore the basics of digital forensics, identify the rules and types of evidence, collect evidence, preserve evidence, maintain a viable chain of custody, investigate a computer crime or a policy violation, examine system artifacts, develop forensic policies and procedures, and examine the policies and procedures associated with e-discovery. In this video, we'll cover evidence, forensics process, analysis, chain of custody, message digest and hash, host forensics, device forensics, network forensics, and e-discovery. Computer forensics is certainly a popular buzzword in computer security. This chapter addresses the key aspects of computer forensics in preparation for the Security Plus exam. It is not intended to be a treatise on the topic or a legal tutorial regarding the presentation of evidence in a court of law. This material is only an introduction to the topic, and before one enters into forensics work or practice, much additional study is necessary. The principles presented in this class are of value in conducting any investigative processes, including internal and external audit procedures, but many nuances of handling legal cases are far beyond the scope of this class. The term forensic relates to the application of scientific knowledge to legal problems. Specifically, computer forensics involves the preservation, identification, documentation, and interpretation of computer data. In today's practice, computer forensics can be performed for three purposes: investigating and analyzing computer systems as related to a violation of law, investigating and analyzing computer systems for compliance with an organization's policies, and responding to a request for digital evidence, or e-discovery. Forensics is often associated with incident response, the procedures used to respond to an abnormal condition in a system. There is subtle difference, however. Incident response is about corrective action, returning the system to a normal operational state, whereas forensics is about figuring out what happened. Evidence consists of the documents, verbal statements, and material objects that are admissible in a court of law. Evidence is critical to convincing management, juries, judges, or other authorities that some kind of violation has occurred. The submission of evidence is challenging, but it is even more challenging when computers are used, because people involved may not be technically educated and thus may not fully understand what's happened. Computer evidence presents yet more challenges because the data itself cannot be experienced with the physical senses. That is, you can see printed characters, but you cannot see the bits where the data is stored. Bits of data are merely magnetic pulses on a disk or some other stored technology. Therefore, data must always be evaluated through some kind of filter rather than sensed directly. This is often a concern for auditors because good auditing techniques require accessing the original data or a version that is close as possible to the original data. All evidence is not created equal. Some evidence is stronger and better than other evidence. Several types of evidence can be germaned as direct evidence, which is oral testimony to provide a specific fact, such as an eyewitness statement. The knowledge of the facts is obtained through the five senses of the witness, with no interference or presumptions. Real evidence, also known as associative or physical evidence, this includes tangible objects that prove or disprove a fact. Physical evidence links the suspect to the scene of a crime. Documentary evidence, evidence in the form of business records, printouts, manuals, and the like. Much of the evidence relating to computer crimes is documentary evidence. And then demonstrative evidence, used to aid the jury and can be in the form of a model, experiment, chart, or so on, offered to prove that an event occurred. Evidence in U.S. federal court cases is governed by a series of legal precedents, the most notable of which is the Daubert standard. 3 U.S. Supreme Court cases articulate the Daubert standard and shape how materials are entered into evidence. 4 specific elements are associated with the admissions of scientific expert testimony. This is important with respect to digital forensics because the form of evidence means that it can rarely speak for itself. Rather, it must be interpreted by an expert and presented to the court. The judge is the gatekeeper. Materials are not considered evidence until declared so by the judge. This is to ensure that experts are determined to be experts before the court relies upon their judgment. The trial judge is to determine that the expert's testimony is relevant to the proceedings at hand, and that the expert's methods are reliable with respect to the material being attested to. The expert knowledge should be based on science, specifically science that is based on scientific method with a replicable methodology. The scientific method must be based on proven science, subjected to peer review, with known error rate or potential error rate, and consensus among scientific community that the methodology is generally accepted. To be credible, especially if evidence is used in court proceedings or in corporate disciplinary action that could be challenged legally, evidence must meet three standards. Sufficient evidence, it must be convincing or measure up without question. Competent, it must be legally qualified and reliable. And relevant, it must be material to the case or have a bearing on the matter at hand. So 3 rules regarding evidence. An item can become evidence when it is admitted by a judge in a case. The 3 rules guide the use of evidence with regards to its use in court proceedings. Best evidence rule is the court prefers original evidence rather than a copy to ensure that no alterations of the evidence, whether intentional or unintentional, has occurred. In some instances, an evidence duplicate can be accepted, such as when the original is lost or destroyed by an act of God or in the normal course of business. A duplicate is also acceptable when a third party beyond the court's subpoena power possesses the original. Exclusionary rule. The Fourth Amendment in the U.S. Constitution precludes illegal search and seizure. Therefore, any evidence collected in violation of the Fourth Amendment is not admissible as evidence. Additionally, if evidence is collected in violation of the Electronic Communications Privacy Act, ECPA, or other related provisions of the code, it may not be admissible to a court. For example, if no policy exists regarding the company's intent to monitor network traffic or systems electronically, the employee has not acknowledged this policy by signing an agreement, or sniffing the employee's network traffic could be violation of the ECPA. However, a note here, it's saying if you don't have a policy. So if you do have a policy and it's signed by the employee, then you as an employer, or your company as an employer, can monitor network traffic and can monitor emails on their email systems. This is evident with a lot of companies where when you click OK to sign into a computer system, they'll add that in as a policy that you are subject to being monitored while on their network. Hearsay rule. Hearsay is second-hand evidence, evidence offered by the witness that is not based on personal knowledge of the witness, but is being offered to prove the truth of the matter asserted. Typically, computer-generated evidence is considered hearsay evidence. As the maker of the evidence, the computer cannot be interrogated. There are exceptions being made where items such as logs and headers, computer-generated materials, are being accepted in court. There are exceptions, but they rarely apply to digital evidence. From a high-level point of view, multiple steps are employed in digital forensics investigations. First is identification. Recognize an incident from indicators and determine its type and scope. Second is preparation. Prepare tools, techniques, and search warrants, and monitor authorizations and management supports. Then your approach and strategy. Dynamically formulate an approach based on the potential impact on bystanders and the specific technology in question. The goal of the strategy should be to maximize the collection of untainted evidence while minimizing the impact on the victim or owners. Preservation. Isolate, secure, and preserve the state of physical and digital evidence. This includes preventing people from using the digital device or allowing other electromagnetic devices to be used within a certain proximity. Proper preservation is essential to prevent alterations of the source. Collection. Record the physical scene and duplicate digital evidence using standardized and accepted procedures. This is where a digital camera and a microphone are vital tools for capturing details, serial numbers, layouts, and so forth, quickly and definitively. Finally, examination, in-depth, systematic search of evidence relating to the suspected crime. This step occurs later in a lab and focuses on identifying and locating potential specific evidence elements, possibly within unconventional locations. It is important to construct detailed documentation for analysis, documenting the metadata and data values that may be relevant to the issues at hand in the investigation. The next step is analysis. Determine significance, reconstruct fragments of data, and draw conclusions based on the elements of evidence found. The data itself cannot tell a story, and in this step, the investigator weaves the elements into a picture, hopefully the only one that can be supported. Although the intuition is to prove guilt, the skilled and seasoned investigator focuses on painting the picture the data describes, regardless of the outcome, and making it comprehensive and complete so that it will stand up to challenge. Multiple people with different skill sets may be needed to complete the picture. Presentation. Summarize and provide an explanation of the conclusion. The results should be written in layman's terms using abstract terminology. If you cannot explain the information to a non-technical layperson, then you do not understand it well enough to complete this aspect. All abstract terminology should reference the specific details of the case. Returning evidence. Ensure physical and digital property is returned to its proper owner and determine how and what criminal evidence must be removed. For example, hardware may be returned, but images of child pornography may be removed. This is not an explicit step of forensics investigation, and most models that address how to seize evidence rarely address this aspect. But at the end of the day, the job is not done until all aspects are finished, and this includes this level of cleanup activity. When an incident occurs, you will need to collect data and information to facilitate your investigation. If someone is committing a crime or intentionally violating a company policy, she or he will likely try to hide his or her tracks. Therefore, you should collect as much information as soon as you can. In today's highly networked world, evidence can be found not only on the workstation or laptop, but also on company-owned file servers, security appliances, and servers located with the Internet Service Provider. From the most volatile to the most persistent data, you want to look at data first looking at CPU storage or the registry and cache on a CPU, the system storage, which is RAM, kernel tables, fixed media such as hard drives, removable media, and then output or hard copies. Evidence must be properly marked as it is collected so it can be identified as a particular piece of evidence gathered at the scene. Properly label and store evidence, and make sure that the labels cannot be easily removed. Keep an evidence control logbook identifying each piece of evidence in case the label is removed, the persons who discovered it, the case number, the date, time, and location of the discovery, and the reason for the collection. Keep a log of all staff hours and expenses. This information should be specific enough for recollecting later in court. It is important to log other identifying marks, such as device make, model, serial number, cable configuration or type, and so on. Note any type of damage to the piece of evidence. Being methodical is extremely important when identifying evidence. Do not collect evidence by yourself. Have a second person who can serve as a witness to your actions. Keep logs of your actions during both seizure and during analysis and storage. I highly recommend, if you have two people, you should have two people, but to have one person videotaping the other person collecting the evidence. So if there's any question later on whether or not evidence is properly obtained, you have video footage of how it was done at the time it was done and where the evidence was located. When collecting evidence, you want to protect it. You want to protect it from electromagnetic or mechanical damage. Ensure that evidence is not tampered with, damaged, or compromised by procedures used during the investigation. This helps to avoid potential liability problems later. So, for example, cell phones, you want to put them in a bag that, or a box that kills or blocks any kind of phone signals without turning off the device if possible, because It's too easy with today's technology that a phone taken into evidence that still has communication capabilities could have a wipe signal sent to it, and therefore destroy the evidence before you have a chance to investigate and protect it. So that's just an example. Protect evidence from extremes in heat and cold, humidity, water, magnetic fields, and vibrations. You don't want a hard disk to be put next to, let's say, a very strong speaker or something in a vehicle because it could potentially wipe the drive. You don't want to put it near anywhere there might be a high magnetic field. Use static-free evidence protection gloves as opposed to standard latex gloves to avoid static electricity. Seal the evidence in proper container with evidence tape and mark it with your initials, date, and case number. Once again, I recommend, if you're doing all this, to have somebody videotaping you as you're doing it. For example, if a mobile phone with advanced capabilities is seized, it should be properly secured in a hard container designed to prevent accidentally pressing the keys during the transit and storage. If the phone is to remain on for analysis, radio frequency isolation bags that attenuate the device's radio signal should be used. This will prevent remote wiping, locking, and disabling of the device. Properly log all evidence in and out of controlled storage. Use proper packing techniques such as placing components in static-free bags, using foam packing material, and using cardboard boxes. Be especially cautious during transport of evidence to ensure custody of evidence is maintained and that evidence isn't damaged or tampered with. When storing evidence, you want to store it in an evidence room with low traffic, restricted access, camera monitoring, and entry logging capabilities. Store components in static-free bags, foam packing material, and cardboard boxes, and inside metal tamper-resistant cabinets or safe whenever possible. Many of today's electronics are sensitive to environmental factors. It is important for storage areas to have environmental controls to protect devices from temperature and humidity changes. It is also prudent to have environmental monitoring devices to ensure that the temperature and humidity remains within a safe range for electronic devices. So if I gather evidence for something like a case or a disciplinary action, we store it in a room that there's only two of us who have the combination to it, and we're supposed to sign in and out of this particular room anytime we enter into it. And inside that room is another safe. So there's at least two layers of combination that only two people have that information to. And we have to attest, we have to have a background clearance, and we have to witness each other going into the evidence in order to make sure that it has not been tampered with. It's very important to maintain the integrity of evidence in any kind of case. How you conduct an investigation is very important, and I will tell you up front, you need to make sure you can separate yourself from whatever it is that you're investigating, that you don't bring emotional or personal feelings into an investigation as not to direct you or taint your findings. You need to remain neutral, and I'll give you an example in just a moment why. When analyzing computer storage components, you must use extreme caution. A copy of the system should be analyzed, never the original system, as that will serve as evidence. A system specifically designed for forensics examination, known as a forensic workstation, can be used. Forensic workstations typically contain hard drive bays, write blockers, analysis software, and other devices to safely image and protect computer forensic data. Analysis should be done in a controlled environment with physical security and control access. Now they're talking about from a point of view of taking a physical device when doing this investigation. In the case I'm going to discuss, it was more accessing logs. In my case, it was a firewall popped hot on an IP address that somebody was going to. The IP address was known for child pornography, and I had to put aside whatever my feelings were about somebody who could be potentially looking at that and trying to find a way to crucify this person for doing something that I might personally think is extremely disgusting and gross, and make sure that I did a very valid investigation. And so what I did first was I looked at what the IP address was, and I looked at how many sites were associated with it. What I found in my initial investigation that there were 90 different adult sites associated with this IP address. So it didn't necessarily mean that the person was seeing illegal material. So it put them in a very gray area. It could be that they were committing a crime. It could be that they were not committing a crime. They were just violating policy use for the network. So I had to look more closely at the different logs, and I had to look at the DNS logs for this particular user. And what I found was they were going to a child pornography site, but a spouse cheating site. And I was able to gather enough evidence that he was signing into it twice a day for about an hour each time, signing in and looking at classified ads of other people looking to cheat on their spouses, reading messages and things of that sort. All of this was done without ever touching the person's system, strictly looking at logs on DNS servers and firewalls and web proxy servers, and I had to build a case against this person. Now, luckily, I was able to put my emotional and personal beliefs aside long enough to be as impartial as possible in this investigation. Otherwise, I might have jumped to conclusions, and this person would have been involved in a federal case for child pornography, when in fact it wasn't child pornography. It was a person who was just violating corporate policy for going to an adult-oriented site that was perfectly a legal site. Tools of the trade: disk wipe utilities, file viewers, forensic programs, forensic workstations, hard drive utilities and tools, and unerase tools, things that help you to recover data that they believe they've erased, but in reality it's still there in bits and bytes on the disk. When a forensics investigation on a series of computers is needed to determine facts in a computer investigation, a variety of methods can be used to discover and recover the evidence. The problem with this approach is that in the process of doing the investigation, the other developers in the area become aware and have a chance to destroy critical evidence. For this reason, and to minimize disruptions to a team, many times the investigation begins with a large-scale forensics duplication effort. The steps are remarkably simple and well practiced by many investigative firms. You document the scope of the machines being investigated, noting the number of drives and size. Send in a team after hours to do the duplications. Open each machine, disconnect the hard drives, and attach the external cables. Duplicate each drive using a forensics duplication procedure that makes a complete image of the hard drive on a separate media source. Reassemble the machine, leaving no evidence that the duplication was performed. The forensics images are then examined one by one at a later time, away from inquisitive and prying eyes. I will tell you, I've done this before where I've had to go in after hours, spend an entire night duplicating systems in order to do an investigation on somebody who was potentially threatening the lives of others around them. One of the important things is, we talked about using the video camera and stuff, going in and taking a picture of everything in the cubicle before you move or touch a single thing. If the idea is to leave unnoticed, you want to make sure that you've got photographs of how everything was laid out. The next hard part to this entire thing is if the person leaves with just the image with just the computer locked and booted in, you don't know if they have open programs or not in the background. You need to be able to do it without raising suspicion. So usually you try to use a tool such as Encase to capture without rebooting the machine in any way. But if you must reboot the machine, what you do is you make it look like it happened to everybody, and you have reboot every single machine in the work area of the ones that you're investigating. Usually coincide it with an update of software or something of the sort, so that it looks like it naturally would update. You want to take that into consideration when you do your investigation. If there's a night during the week that normally updates are pushed, you can use that to your advantage, knowing that all of the systems will be rebooted when those updates are pushed. After successfully imaging the drives to be analyzed and calculating and storing the message digests, the investigators can begin the analysis. The details of investigations will depend on the particulars of the incident being investigated. However, in general, the following steps will be involved. Check the recycle bin for deleted files. Check the web browsing history files and address bar histories. Check the web browser cookie files. Different browsers store cookies in different locations. Check the temporary internet file folders. Search for suspect character strings. To conserve valuable time, be wise in the choice of words you search for, choosing confidential, sensitive, sex, or other explicit words and phrases related to your investigation. Search the Slack and free space for suspect character strings as described previously. These are some things that you need to do to restore your system after you've responded to an incident and completed your initial investigation. Place the system behind a firewall, reload the operating system, run scanners, install security software, remove unneeded services and applications, apply patches, or restore the system from backup. When possible, I suggest doing clean installs as opposed to restoring from backups, because it is possible when malicious software is involved that the software could have other versions or other files that have been on that system since infection that you've not been able to find, and it might have been backed up in previous backups. So evidence once collected must be properly controlled to prevent tampering. The chain of custody accounts for all persons who handle or had access to the evidence. The chain of custody should show who obtained the evidence, when and where it was obtained, where it was stored, and who had control or possession of the evidence for the entire time since the evidence was obtained. The following shows critical steps in the chain of custody. Record each item collected as evidence. Record who collected the evidence along with the date and time it was collected or recorded. Write a description of the evidence in the documentation. Put the evidence in containers and tag the containers with a case number, the name of the person who collected it, and the date and time it was collected or put into the container. Record all message digests or hash values in the documentation. Securely transport the evidence to a protected storage facility. Obtain a signature from the person who accepts the evidence at this storage facility. Provide controls to prevent access to and compromise of evidence while it's being stored. Securely transport the evidence to court for proceedings. If files, logs, and other information are going to be captured and used for evidence, you need to ensure that the data isn't modified. In most cases, a tool that implements a hashing algorithm to create message digests is used. A hashing algorithm performs a function similar to the familiar parity bits, checksums, or cyclical redundancy checks, CRC. It applies mathematical operations to a data stream or file to calculate some number that is unique based on the information contained in the data or file. If a subsequent hash created on the same data results in a different hash value, it usually means the data stream has changed. The hash tool is applied to each file or log, and the message digest value is noted in the investigation documentation. It is good practice to write the logs to a write-once media, such as a CD-ROM. When the case actually goes to trial, the investigator may need to run the tool on the files or logs again to show that it has not been altered with in any way since being obtained. So when doing host forensics, you're going to want to look at file systems first. Physical memory storage devices can be divided into a series of containers called partitions. A partition is a logical storage unit that is subsequently used by an operating system. Systems can have multiple partitions for a wide variety of reasons, ranging from hosting multiple operating systems to performance maximizing efforts to protection efforts. The broad issue of partition operation and management is outside the scope of this chapter, but this is a critical topic to understand. Free space. Since a deleted file is not actually completely erased or overwritten, it sits on the hard drive until the operating system needs to use the space for another file or application. Sometimes the second file that is saved in the same area does not occupy as many clusters as the first file, so a fragment of the original file is left over. The cluster that holds the fragment of the original file is referred to as free space, because the operating system has marked it as usable when needed. As soon as the operating system stores something else in that cluster, it is considered allocated. The unallocated clusters still contain the original data till the operating system overwrites them. Looking at the free space might reveal information left over from files that the user thought were deleted from the drive. Slack space is another place that you review. It's different from free space. When a file is saved to a hard drive or other storage media, the operating system allocates space in blocks of predefined size called clusters. If your file contains only 10 characters, the operating system will allocate a full cluster. With space left over in the cluster, this is slack space. It is possible for a user to hide malicious code, tools, or clues in slack space as well as in free space. You may also find information in slack space from files that previously occupied the same cluster. Therefore, an investigator should review slack space using utilities that can display the information stored in those areas. Hidden files. There are numerous ways to hide files on an operating system. One method is to hide files by setting the hidden attribute, which limits the listing of them by a standard file utility. Device so that the system files that should not be directly manipulated are hidden from easy view. This concept raises a broader question with respect to forensics. How can a user hide information from easy accessibility? There is a wide range of methods of hiding files, and any attempt to list them and subject to continual change. The major one typically encountered includes having a file extension, encryption, streams, and storage on other partitions. We have already covered partitions. It is obvious that a forensics investigation should find, enumerate, and explore all partitions. Streams will be covered in the next section. Encrypted data, by its very nature, is hidden from view. Without the key, modern encryption methods resist any brute force attempts to determine the content. It's important to find encrypted data stores and document the locations for later use by legal counsel. Changing file extension doesn't actually alter the content or usability of a file. It merely breaks the automatic runtime association manager that determines what executable is associated with the file. The challenge of how to handle file types goes back to the earlier days of computers when magic number methods were created. The term magic number describes a series of digits near the beginning of the file that provided information about the file format. In some cases, the magic number could be read by humans, such as a GIF87A or GIF89A. It indicates both graphics exchange formats and specifications. Streams is a name for the alternate data streams, a specific data structure associated with NTFS. The normal location for data in a NTFS-based system is in the data stream, a location identified by a record in a master file table called data, which is technically an unnamed data stream. Alternate data streams have names and are identified by the $data: stream name, where the stream name is the name of the stream being used. Streams can be used to hide information, although the information is still persistent. Most of the normal file utilities do not deal with the streams, so it won't be seen. Forensic tool suites have tools that can search for and report on and analyze stream data on Windows systems. Then there's Windows metadata. Microsoft Windows-based systems have a wide range of artifacts. Before we can examine some of these artifacts, it is important to understand why they exist. The vast majority of artifacts exist for the purpose of improving the user experience. Tracking what users do and have done and making the information available to the operating system to improve future use is one of the primary reasons for the information. Its forensic value is secondary. The first and foremost Windows artifact is the system registry, which acts as a database repository of a whole host of information and provides one-stop shop for a wide range of Windows forensics artifacts. What applications have been installed, user activity associated with external devices, and more. Although the specific artifacts needed in an investigation differ based on the scope of the investigation, it is safe to assume that metadata recorded by the Windows operating system will serve as useful purpose in the investigation, especially since the registry is stored by user and therefore activity recorded in the registry is attributed to a user. You can also find information on things such as USB drives that were attached to the system, what the names were, the serial numbers, things of that sort. So you want to make sure that you're looking at that to see if data was exfilled. So Linux and Unix operating systems have their own set of artifacts, mostly in the context of logs. From a forensics perspective, Linux systems differ from Windows systems in three main ways. There's no registry. Program data is stored in scattered locations. Different file system, as a multitude of different file systems are used, each with different attributes. So if you want to look for that slack space or that free space, it's different in a Linux or Unix environment. And then plaintext abound. Files and data tends to be in plain text, which impacts searching. The lack of a registry to hold system and program information does not mean that the information is not there. It just means that it is distributed. When it comes to performing forensics on a Linux system, the value of a good system administrator cannot be understated. Many of the artifacts of activity on a Linux system are scattered to various local locations, and a good system administrator can assist in locating and recovering the essential elements for the analysis. So we've concentrated mostly on computers for the moment, but there are other things such as device forensics. It's the application of digital forensics principles to devices such as mobile phones, tablets, and the endless list of things that comprise the Internet of Things and more. The fact that it is a device does not change the principle pertaining to the collection and handling of evidence. All of the forensic principles should apply and are just as important. What does change are the tools and processes employed to retrieve and analyze the data. This is because the file systems, data structures, and operating systems and artifacts are different than those in the world of servers and PCs. Solid-state drive forensics, because of the way that the systems are designed, a lot of standard artifacts that would be found in a magnetic memory system are not present in a solid-state drive. We're talking about the slack space and the free space. As these drives are becoming more common in devices, forensics analysts have to take all of these technical issues into consideration when attempting to reconstruct what happened. And network forensics, I kind of touched on this earlier when we were talking about investigations, is the capture, recording, and analysis of network events in order to discover the source of network problems or security incidents. As a general-purpose tool, network forensics is nearly impossible because of the scale issues. But in specific situations, such as in front of a high-value target that have limited data movement, it could prove to be valuable. It can also be valuable in troubleshooting ongoing incidents and problems in the network. The same rules apply to network forensics as applies to all other forensic collection efforts. Preserving the integrity of the data is paramount, and maintaining control over the data is always a challenge. Forensic rules, such as admissibility, chain of custody, etc., do not change because the source of data has changed. Electronic discovery, or e-discovery, is the term used for the document and data production requirements as part of a legal discovery in civil litigation. When a civil lawsuit is filed under court approval, a firm can be compelled to turn over specific data from systems pursuant to the legal issues at hand. Electronic information is considered to be the same as paper documents in some respects and completely different in others. The evidentiary value can be identical. The fragility can be substantial. Electronic records can be changed without leaving a trace. Electronic documents can also have metadata associated with the documents, such as who edited the document, previous version information, and more. It may seem that big data is all the rage in business today, but in reality it's simply a description of the times. We have created large data stores in most enterprises, a byproduct of cheap storage and the ubiquity of the Internet. Big data is an issue in e-discovery as well. The cataloging, storage, and maintenance of corporate records often becomes a big data issue. The cloud has become a resource for enterprise IT systems, and as such, it is intimately involved in both e-discovery and forensics. Having data that may or may not be directly accessed by the tools of e-discovery and forensics can complicate needed processes. An additional complication is the legal issues associated with the contracts between the organization and the cloud provider. As both forensics and e-discovery are secondary processes for a business perspective, they may or may not be addressed in a standard cloud agreement. Because these processes can become important, and if they do, it may be too late to contractually address them. It behooves an organization to prepare by addressing them in cloud agreements with third parties. I'm your instructor, Peter Keurig for Nashville Community College. Thank you for watching.